Hi everyone, Professor Christensen here. Today I'm going to walk us through the lab that we use in our financial accounting class where we have to prepare financial statements in Excel. So the purpose of this is, first of all, to practice the income statement and the balance sheet that you just learned about, and also to learn how to use references in Excel. And notice that our directions here, so we're going to use references and formulas, use the sum function, so we're going to learn how to do those, and then we're going to learn how to format our numbers and to put in some underlines. All right, so the first thing I would do if I start a problem like this is I would go down each of these and I would decide what kind of account is this. Is this an asset, liability, equity, revenue, expense? All right, so let's do that. Cash. So I would recommend, if you're watching this and you're in class and you're going to be doing this yourself, or either way, I would recommend pausing the video and do it yourself. Go down this list and decide, is it an asset, liability, equity, revenue, or expense? Because that is fundamental to everything in accounting, right? That's the first thing that you need to know. Okay, so once you do it yourself, now let's go through this and see what the answers are. So cash you should have as an asset. Accounts payable is a liability. And remember that payable equals liability. All right, so whenever you see payable, that's going to mean that's a liability. Okay, not every liability will say payable, but every payable is going to be a liability. All right, supplies are an asset. Remember, assets are resources that will benefit the company in the future. Revenue is simply a revenue. Common stock is an equity account. Advertising expense is an expense, as is salaries expense. Land is an asset. Notes payable, again, we see that payable, so we know that's a liability. Now this is our retained earnings at the beginning. So that means this was the retained earnings balance from last year. And I'm just going to make a note here that the balance sheet uses ending retained earnings. Right? Number one mistake that students make when they're preparing a balance sheet is that their retained earnings are wrong. So this is an equity account, but that's not the balance that we're going to be using on our balance sheet when we're finishing up. All right, very important. Okay, rent expense is an expense. Accounts receivable is an asset. That's money that our customers owe us because we provided them with the service and they haven't paid us yet. An expense for insurance, and then dividends is really an equity account, right? It's going to reduce our retained earnings. All right, so now we're going to use the correct accounts in the right financial statement. So hopefully you know that the formula for the income statement is revenues minus expenses equals net income. Okay? Revenues minus expenses equals net income. So these are just little reminders over here. That's not part of your financials. I'll put these in blue so we know. These are like those are little hints to help you when you're help you with your studies. Let's make it a bright blue so this way we know that is not part of our financial statements, okay? All right, so now we're looking for revenues and expenses for our income statement. Our revenue is service revenue. Sometimes we put a little heading in here, revenues, and we're going to call it service revenue. And by the way, actually, much easier. Say equals, click on the service revenue, hit enter, and we're going to get the words. All right? Now, the words, I'm not worried about the references, but for numbers, you should be using references. So here we're going to say equals, click on the 190,000, hit enter, and this is a reference number. So this is really important because if somebody by some chance says, uh-oh, our revenue is actually 250,000, fix our data, well, that's going to fix all of your numbers here and everything else is going to work out okay, right? So you always want to use formulas and references. All right, next up is expenses. And let's put our expenses, by the way, as you go along, I would highly recommend highlighting these or changing the color of the font or something, so this way you remember which ones you used, because when you're done, you should have used all of the accounts, okay? Let's put our expenses from largest to smallest. All right, so if we look up here carefully, you're going to see that the largest expense is salaries expense. And we're going to put our expenses over to the left because we're going to add, so it's not confusing, we're going to add up the expenses and then subtract the total from our revenue. So it'll just be a little clearer. It's not completely necessary, but it does make it look a little neater. All right, our next largest expense is insurance. So we're going to put our insurance expense here. And again, let's highlight it so that we know we did it, we used it. Okay. Next up is, looks like advertising expense is next, and advertising is here. Okay, highlight it because we used it. And then we have one last expense, and that is rent. So our rent expense goes here. All right, let's highlight that. Okay. So now we have used up all of our revenues and expenses, so that means we're ready to finish up our income statement. So we're going to say total expenses, and then we're going to come here. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. If you have more than 2 or 3 items, I would recommend doing a sum. So either you could type in equals sum, or you could just go up here where it says auto sum, and that's easier, right? So you click on auto sum, but now you need to tell Excel which sums to add up, which numbers to add up. But we don't want to add that, we want to add these, right? So we highlight those, and then we hit enter, okay? So again, what I did was, let me take that out. We come here, we click on auto sum, and then we add these up, or we highlight those and we tell Excel these are the ones I want to add up. And notice this is the formula if you wanted to type it in. It's equals sum and then parentheses, and then you show the range. The range is B29 to B32. All right, and then you hit enter. All right, so finally we said our net income is equal to revenues minus expenses. All right, now we have all of our numbers, but we want to make this look nice. So we're going to put some dollar signs. I'm holding down the control key to highlight those 3. And I'm going to come up here to this little arrow, and it's already formatted accounting with 0 decimal places, which is good. I'm going to add a dollar sign to these 3 because this is just convention in accounting. We put it at the top of each column and then at the bottom. So here we have our dollar signs. And then I'm going to put in some lines. So anytime you add or subtract, we put an underline, just like you would in an addition problem. And then remember at the very bottom, we come up here again to we want our double border on the very bottom. So our borders are right up here. You just click in the cell that you want to put the border on and then click the kind of border that you want up here. All right. Okay, so our income statement is all done. All right. Now next up is our balance sheet, and hopefully you remember your balance sheet, assets, this is the accounting equation, equals liabilities plus stockholders' equity. All right, so let's put in our assets. Remember, our assets go in order of liquidity, so the most liquid asset is always going to be cash. So we're going to put our cash first. And our cash is equal to 44,000. Again, I'm going to highlight this, all right, so that we know that we used our cash. Now, let's see what else. So we have our cash. What other assets do we have, and which ones are the most liquid? So it looks like we have supplies. Those are pretty liquid. They'll get used up fairly quickly, right? Land is not liquid. And then we have accounts receivable. So remember, accounts receivable is money that your customers owe you. Typically, they're going to pay you within 30 to 60 days. All right. So let's put our accounts receivable next to cash because that's the next most liquid asset. So equals accounts receivable. And again, we say equals, click on the number you want to go there, and then hit enter. And our next most liquid asset is going to be supplies. So we click on equals supplies, hit enter, equals, click on the number, hit enter. I'm going to highlight that again. All right. And then our least liquid asset is going to be land. So let's say land. And our land is equal to $90,000. Okay. And then let's highlight that. Okay. All right, so now we're going to wait. Let's wait on the total assets because we'll put it down at the bottom on the same line as where the liabilities and stockholders' equity are. And we're not sure where those are going to be yet. Okay. All right, so our liabilities, remember what we said. Payable equals liability, and we have two of them. We have accounts payable and we have notes payable. So usually in our liabilities, we'll put either the largest one first or notes payable first. And in this case, notes payable happens to be the largest. So let's list as our first liability notes payable. And that's equal to $40,000. All right, we highlight our notes payable. Okay, then again, we're going to say equals, come up to our accounts payable. And our accounts payable are $16,000. Highlight that. All right, so that's our liabilities. So let's put in a line here, total liabilities. That's pretty important, right? We want to know, you would want to know how much a company owes. So this one you could either say equals this plus that, or you could say sum. And if you click on auto sum, Excel's going to give you the right ones in this case, and you just hit enter. Now I'm going to put a line here to tell people that we added. All right, so this way we know 40 plus the 16 gave us the 56. Next up, stockholders' equity. All right, and in the stockholders' equity, we have basically right now, at the very beginning of learning accounting, the two things we know that we have in stockholders' equity are common stock and retained earnings, and they go in that order. So first up, common stock, and again, we say equals, click on the number, and hit enter. We highlight our common stock. All right. And now our retained earnings. Now, I'm going to type it in because we don't want our beginning retained earnings. All right. Now, hopefully you remember the formula for retained earnings. So beginning retained earnings plus net income minus dividends equals ending retained earnings. All right. So that's what we have to do here. We want ending retained earnings. Let's put in parentheses. Normally you wouldn't put this on your financials, but let's just put it here to remind you that we always use ending retained earnings on our balance sheet. Okay? All right, so this is going to be equal to beginning retained earnings plus, type in a plus, net income from our income statement minus dividends. Hit enter. All right, so we took care of our beginning retained earnings, we took care of our dividends. Everything here was used, which is as it should be. And now let's add things up and let's cross our fingers and hopefully our balance sheet balances. Okay, so our total stockholders' equity, I'm going to just abbreviate because I might run out of room there. So our total stockholders' equity is, let's do a plus here, is equal to that plus that, right? You could also use auto sum. Put a line under there, and then we have our total liabilities and stockholders' equity. And that's equal to our liabilities plus our stockholders' equity. Okay. All right, so let's put our total assets on the same line. Remember, this number should be equal to the 196, so let's do auto sum, add it up, and great, we have 196. All right, so now let's make it look nice. I'm going to give this a top border and a double bottom border to show that we added to get that number. I'm going to add some dollars here and here. Whoops. US dollars. And I'm gonna format this the same as that. Now, the easy way to do that, click on this and say Format Painter, and then click on that, and it gives you the same formatting. Okay. All right. So now you have a set of financial statements. You've learned how to use references. If you want to make sure, you should never have any numbers typed in. If you want to make sure that this is all good, you click on Control and tilde, which is that little kind of like a little swirly thing up on the keyboard next to the number 1, to the left of number 1. So click Control and tilde, and you can look and see, and this is what I do when I grade these, I look to see that there's all references and formulas and no numbers are typed in. Okay? And remember, the reason the numbers are not typed in, let's imagine that we come here and we say, oh, we want to make our revenue, again, let's say 250,000, right? Instead, we had a mistake. Look, guess what? Everything is fixed. Our net income was adjusted. Of course, we're not going to balance because everything else is not in balance, but our ending retained earnings got adjusted. Everything automatically got fixed. Okay? So that's the beauty of Excel. I hope you find this helpful, and you know, if you like the video, subscribe to my channel. If you're in my class, I look forward to seeing you soon. All right, take care. Happy accounting.